Welcome back to Ray's Talk Show, the podcast that won't be silenced. Thank you so much for joining us. This is your host, Ray Collazo. You can download Ray's Talk Show anywhere. You can download and subscribe and review. Most importantly, notably, a podcast, iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, YouTube, anywhere you can download a podcast. And check out Ray's Talk Show on social media at Ray's, R-A-Y-S, Latino Talk on Instagram, or on Twitter at Ray's Podcast, R-A-Y-S Podcast. On this episode of Ray's Talk Show, you'll hear an interview originally aired on our What's Next special radio series that's being aired on WPPM 106.5 FM Community Radio with Democratic strategist Abe Amoros. Abe and I discuss what's next for the Democratic Party, what should be the policy agenda for the upcoming Congress, the intra-party battle between progressives and establishment Democrats, the future of the labor movement's role in the Democratic Party, and our first deep dive into the 2020 Democratic presidential primary. It deserves its own podcast. So juicy, so exciting. But first, wanted to mention this episode is dedicated in the memory of Jackelin Caal. Jackelin tragically passed away at the age of 7 years old in the custody of Border Patrol agents after being picked up a few weeks ago with her father, Neri, after crossing our southern border in New Mexico. The Caal family lawyer is reporting that no water was provided in the initial hours Jackelin was in ICE custody. And while we will never truly know, it's certainly much more likely Jackelin would be alive today if she was provided prompt medical attention. This administration is not only unhinged, scattershot, and extremely right-wing, but its cruel rhetoric and policies have now infiltrated the soul of some of us, and in this case, giving immigration enforcement officials license to tap into their most evil instincts to dehumanize immigrants to the point where Jackelin passed away. We're losing lives, we're losing babies over this nonsense. We will never forget you, Jackelin. We will keep fighting for our democracy and the rights of all children everywhere in your honor. Let's hear now from Abe Amoros in our conversation on what's next for the Democratic Party, and I'll be back with other breaking news here on Ray's Talk Show. You're listening to WPPM LP Philadelphia, and you're listening to What's Next, a special series on WPPM Radio, where we will explore what's next for mobilizing Philadelphia and our country. On What's Next, we will talk to activists, organizers, political figures, and creatives on how we continue to resist and thrive in 2019. This is your host, Ray Collazo. I'm a proud organizer, family man, and quite horrible domino player, which is tough for a Puerto Rican during the holidays, as my guest will attest. Thank you so much for joining us, and we're again thankful for WPPM Radio for the opportunity to bring the Ray's Latino Talk Show family to community radio. In this edition of What's Next, we will discuss what's next for the Democratic Party. The standard-bearing institution of the resistance movement against the Trump administration has recently run control of the House of Representatives. And that's a lot of work, and there's still many questions that linger about their appetite to truly be that resistance, how they will balance the various factions of the Democratic Party, and what indeed the Democratic Party will stand for moving into 2019 and beyond. And I couldn't think of a better person to have this conversation than one of my wonderful friends, who's also the Pennsylvania State Legislative Director for Labor's International Union of North America, Abe Amoros. Abe, welcome to What's Next.
Thank you for having me. I greatly appreciate it.
Abe, I know you're a much better domino player than I am, so I didn't want to throw you into that, put that tar on you. But I must say, during the holidays, I go to these parties, and I'm so bad, and nobody wants to play with me. And I must say that it becomes a little bit of I have a complejo about it. But anyway, we'll go into this. Abe, you've done it all in Democratic and certainly labor politics. You've worked for the Pennsylvania State Senate. You worked, of course, you were the communications and spokesperson for some time for then Governor Ed Rendell. And you once, I believe, ran this, you were the Commerce Director for the State Democratic Party during the Howard Dean tenure. So you're sort of a wonderful person to have part of this conversation. We are going to talk later because it's so much fun. We are going to talk a little bit about 2020. We've had our actually one of the first candidates jump into the fray. So just for fun, I want to pick Abe's brain about just kind of how we should be thinking about the Democratic field, which seems so far away, but it really isn't. Abe, so let's just start with, now that we've gotten past the midterm elections, I wanted to get your take about how you're feeling generally about our movement going into 2019 and your specific thoughts about where sort of the Democratic Party is post the 2018 electoral cycle.
Absolutely. There are a lot of opportunities that the Democratic Party has right now in terms of defining a clear-cut message as to how to move forward, especially as it relates to people who have typically felt forgotten in the past. I mean, workers have felt forgotten. Folks that live in rural areas have felt forgotten. And quite frankly, I don't think the Democratic Party has really done a service to communities of color in terms of something that is consistent. It's one thing to come and visit into communities of color during primaries, during general elections, but there has to be organizing in between. There has to be messaging, and there has to be a basic fundamental connection as people. I mean, we have to start off as individuals and really connecting with folks at a basic human level. So I am very excited about the opportunities in the next several years, but we've got to start doing it now. And we also need to reach out to young voters. Young voters are showing that the Democratic messages resonate with them in terms of equality, in terms of fairness, in terms of access to health care, in terms of access to educational opportunities. And, we are at a crossroads right now. I mean, no one is happy with the president. There's no question about it. But who's going to emerge as that leader? And are we going to show a united front as Democrats, or are we going to bicker and limp across the finish line as we've done in so many instances, in so many cases? So right now is the perfect opportunity to start talking about organizing at the most fundamental level. You start with your family, then you talk to your friends, the folks you go to church with, the ones you see at the supermarket every week, and then you go from there. But there are opportunities to get plugged in to the formal Democratic Party structures as well.
So that seems to be quite where the rubber hits the road, right, Abe? Because there is a lot of obviously Democratic leaning or Democratic friendly voters. We're it's clearly the majority of our country, but the challenge is that many of those people and much of the energy is not being expressed through Democratic Party politics. It's being expressed either through sort of progressive organizing on various levels when it comes to the women's movement and various other issue movements or community movements we see in the country. It's coming through sort of an insurgency in the party, whether it's progressive activists in the case of and she comes up, seems like she comes up every week on the show, incoming Congresswoman-elect Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's insurgent run against the formal Democratic Party structure in her congressional race, and we have other examples of that around the country. So I as you say that, Abe, I'm wondering how much of the how can the Democratic Party capture some of that energy and actually do some of that organizing on behalf of the Democratic Party with its platform and the values? Because what we saw in 2016 and what we continue to see is that a large segment, some would argue potentially the majority of the segment of what makes ideologically the Democratic community are not Democrats. They're registered independents or they advocate more as progressives or identify much more as progressives than Democrats per se.
Right. That's exactly right. The party labels are starting to wear off a little bit. However, that's not to say that the party structure is still not relevant. It is. It's quite relevant, as a matter of fact. And it starts at the top with the party chair structure. It could be at the county level. It could be at the municipal level. It could even be at the ward level. So it is incumbent upon us as progressives to really demand a spot at the table, to have these hard conversations, because what we're finding is that those groups that are galvanized, they're the ones making noise, they're the ones that are organizing, they're the ones that are going to be the future. And it would be in the best interest of the established Democrats, the ones that have been around for 30, 40 years, to start embracing new leadership, to start embracing new voices, and making sure that everybody's heard, everybody's given a platform, everybody's given an opportunity. And again, this goes back to connecting at the human level. We all have basic needs. One of them is we want to be listened to, we want to be taken seriously, and we want to be able to share our thoughts and our ideas and our visions to make our communities better, to make the state better, to make the country better. So I really think that this is the perfect opportunity to have these discussions, given what has happened since 2016. We made a calamitous error in electing Donald J. Trump to the White House. And as a result of it, his leadership has really emboldened racists, misogynists, bigots, homophobes, and made it okay to really show your stripes. And as a result, a lot of communities have suffered. Some of them have suffered openly, and we simply cannot tolerate that anymore. I mean, the Democratic Party stands for defending the rights of the individual, the little guy and gal out there, regardless of who or she loves, regardless of where they worship, regardless of how much money they make. I cannot stress that enough. I mean, I'm clinging on to my Democratic roots because I believed it when I registered as a Democrat, and I believe it today. But we can stray from that message sometimes, and we need to come right back to it. And I think that a lot of progressive groups have gotten fed up with the structure and have really done their own thing. But we need to come back to the platforms and the things that have worked in the past. But that's not to say we don't have a lot of work to do, because we do. We really have a ton of work to do.
So I want to get back to those leaders. We're going to talk about Tom Perez. We're going to talk about Nancy Pelosi and others in a moment. But I do want to ask you, Abe, on that point. So I want to try to channel, the perspective for a moment of maybe a newer activist to this, a progressive activist that hears you, Abe, and says, "Okay, I'm feeling what Abe's talking about. Giving, a bolder vision for our country, being real Democrats, living the lyrics, being there for our people, opening the doors of opportunity." And then I see, two almost octogenarians walk into the White House for a recent meeting with Donald Trump. I see sort of a pretty feeble insurgent attempt to knock off presumably incoming Speaker Nancy Pelosi. You see a very, on the top levels of the party, a very sort of elderly and not quite bold face, with a few exceptions. So if for that person out there that lives in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, or another part, or Osceola, Florida, how does that person get engaged to influence the Democratic Party in a very practical way, because they may not be seeing it by the leadership on a national level, and they don't see how to make that impact because they're not seeing it from the outside yet.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me share my experience and my story. I ran for office. When I was 24 years old, and I won. I became the youngest member of a city council in a third-class city in Pennsylvania, 42,192 people. And I was bold enough to step out and speak my mind, knock on doors, be part of the organization, and let them tell me no. Because power is seldomly given up. It's something that has to be taken. You have to be bold. You have to have confidence in yourself. Even when you don't have confidence in yourself, you've got to show that you can do the job. Because, again, we're all humans, and we all suffer from some sort of questioning ourselves sometimes. It's perfectly normal. I mean, it's not a knock on anybody. But I would tell people, start with the Democratic committee structure that's in the county or within the municipality. Run for public office. If you don't want to run for public office, help somebody who's running for public office. You learn so much in the background. You learn so much interacting with people in terms of fundraising, in terms of messaging, in terms of door-to-door, the get-out-the-vote campaign strategies, even on things that need to be done on Election Day. Those are all very valuable tools, very valuable skills to learn So surround yourself with people that have been through the process. So let me just say about those octogenarians, they need to be in the room. We need experienced, stable, reasonable leadership. But that doesn't mean that that's all there is out there, because those folks have a responsibility to help those who are coming up in the ranks, to mentor them, to teach them, to encourage them, to open up doors that have been typically closed in the past to them, because we're not going anywhere as progressives. We're not going away as young people. Now, I'm 51 years old, and I still consider myself young. So, listen, I know those octogenarians, the optics sometimes aren't very good, but, brother, they bring a lot to the table. They've been through it. They have survived, and they're there for a reason.
Regardless of who's in those seats, whatever their profile is, we have to, as progressives or as Democrats, we have to be holding them accountable every step of the way. Listen to Abe Amoros, a fantastic labor and legislative thinker and a great Democratic strategist that's worked in labor and party politics on a state, local, and national level. Abe, when we come back after this brief break, I want to ask you about what's going to be the Democratic Party agenda going into 2019, how we should prioritize that agenda, and how we hold this party accountable to the agenda we want to see going into the next Congress. Does that sound good to you? This is Ray Collazo, and you're listening to What's Next, the special series on WPPM 106.5 FM, People-Powered Media. That's what I'm talking about, Abe. And I'm talking to one of my great friends, Abe Amoros, Democratic strategist, labor leader, political leader, community leader, and just a wonderful family man in person. And I wanted to, before we get into the Democratic agenda, Abe, I wanted to tirar otra flor, because you recently became I believe, historical figure, the first Latino trustee of the University of Pennsylvania, Penn State University system. So, Abe, that's a great honor and shows your commitment to higher education.
Thank you very much. This is a position that Governor Wolf has honored me with in terms of the appointment, and I was unanimously voted in by the Senate on October the 24th. It's something that I hold close to my heart. I love Penn State as an institution, which helped me become the person I am today. But when I look around at that table, I see very little diversity, which troubles me. And, it's funny, Ralph, because the ex officio, one of the ex officio members is actually the Secretary of Education, Pedro Rivera.
Oh, okay.
So you could argue that he was the first Latino, although he's ex officio.
Okay.
That's according to the bylaws and the charter of Penn State. So the Secretary of Education always holds a seat, and it's a non-voting seat, and the governor gets to appoint 6 people. So I am very flattered, very honored to be one of the 6 and one of the 33 that really governs a $6.3 billion operation and the 6th largest employer in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So I'm really flattered that he chose me for that position. And thank you for your kind words.
No, Abe, it's very well deserved. I know that's been sort of a bucket list or a dream role that you'd like to have, and it's very well deserved. And we want to definitely engage you here on What's Next and Ray's Talk Show. We want to continue to have these conversations when we get into the conversation about education. What's next for education? What's next for higher education for our children and our community? So Abe's got a lot of irons in the fire, or a lot of, is that the phrase? But we're talking to Abe Amoros about what's next for the Democratic Party. We're going to talk later in the show about sort of our initial prognosticating as it relates to one of our favorite topics, the 2020 Democratic nomination process. That's going to be an exciting field and we're going to have hours and hours of conversation here on What's Next about that. But right now we're talking about what's next for the Democratic Party. What direction does it go now as sort of the standard bearer for the resistance movement against this president? It's very punitive and very regressive policies, specifically targeting people of color and working people. Abe, I wanted to talk to you now. So the House of Representatives is now controlled by the Democrats. We've obviously seen incoming Speaker Pelosi get a lot of attention this week for clapping back at President Trump during this border wall budget negotiation here at the end of the year. But in 2019, she'll have indeed the gavel in her hand, and she'll have an opportunity to sort of push our agenda. So there's a lot of conversations around this, right? So how proactive is the Democratic Party in passing legislation, regardless of it, ultimately maybe getting passed, but to sort of put a marker up. What issues do we focus on? How much do we focus on sort of accountability around the Russian investigation and all these various scandals that are befitting this president? Impeachment is in the air. So what do you think is what do you think Democrats should prioritize specifically around congressional action going into 2019?
Well, I certainly think, Ralph, that immigration has to be one of them. A comprehensive immigration reform, something that's fair. I was really troubled to learn earlier that a 7-year-old girl died short of the border because she basically starved to death. I mean, she had no food, she had no water, so she suffered from dehydration. Ultimately, passed. It's part of a cruel system that is so punitive to poor brown people who only want to make a better life for themselves and their children, like previous generations have done for the last 200 years. It is reprehensible to me, and if we don't come up with a comprehensive immigration system in place by 2020 that people can agree upon, and you hit the nail on the head, brother. I don't want to discount what you said. The Senate is no joke. The Senate is going to be a huge hurdle. No matter what the House passes, the Senate and Mitch McConnell, the senator from Kentucky, he is just going to basically throw anything the House does into a bucket and set it aside. So that's going to be a challenge in and of itself. But the House has a responsibility because they have the majority to hold the president's feet to the fire in terms of comprehensive immigration reform. Let's wait to see what the Robert Mueller investigation shows before we start impeachment proceedings. Do I think it's going to come to that? I do, but there should be no rush to do it. In fact, from a political standpoint, even a snarky standpoint, if you will, you really want him to suffer poorly so his base starts to crumble a little at a time. And it is crumbling a little bit at a time, not at the rate that I had hoped for, which is very frustrating because it just goes to show that even when you're proven wrong, people just dig in. Again, it's just a basic human condition.
Well, the thing is, Abe, is that, but think about, to your point, and I agree with you, and I mentioned this on last week's episode, is that my opinion is that there's no rush because we don't even know 15% of all the dirt yet. So,
That's true,
I think the tone of the country and even his base is going to be in a much different place. It's in a much different place in the last 4 days since the last episode. I mean, think about, I think his buddy Robert Pecker spilling the beans and admitting to, and presumably leaking that not only did he make the payments on behalf of Trump specifically to impact the election, but that Trump was in the room when that conversation took place in 2015. So when you got Fox, those Fox diehards starting to message, I don't know if you saw this morning, but several of them said, this is looking really shaky. So that, and those are the people that these, his base listens to. So again, you're right. So I don't think there's a need to do it, in January, but by the time it's politically palatable in the spring, there'll be so much more dirt out. It'll be much easier to do anyway. So, and again, you're listening to Abe Amoros, Democratic strategist here on the What's Next series here on WPPM Radio, 106.5 FM. Abe, thinking about, and, when we get into the conversation in the next segment about the presidential horse race, I think when I think about the congressional strategy around working people's issues, and not that immigration reform's not, but certainly kind of even beyond that, there's this sort of push and pull between, and this will be part of the dynamics of the 2020 race, right? Like, do we focus on sort of the Sherrod Brown agenda, kind of very focused on, Midwest, the profile of people that many of which flipped on for Trump in 2016, sort of the disenfranchised Midwest, older white working person that, harbors bitterness against NAFTA still, that harbors bitterness against sort of the change in our demographics and culture, the fields left behind by the technological age, and or do we focus on sort of on some level the demographic of the Democratic Party and the progressive movement that are symbolized by some combination of Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Andrew Gillum, and that wing of it. Younger people, more willing to diverse, much more comfortable with technology. Maybe feels straddled, shackled by student loan debt. And so thinking about economic and labor's in that. And I want to ask you some specific questions about labor in a minute and the labor movement. But, so what should be the focus of the economic agenda going into 2019 with all these different factors that we have to balance?
Mm-hmm. We need to address income inequality in this country. And we also are going to have to whip out our brooms, take them out of the closet, and start sweeping the mess that this tax cut has created. Because, brother, let me tell you, the rich are starting to get richer, and the tax cut relief that any middle-class families experience, it's starting to wear off. And the budget itself is going to explode in terms of a deficit as a result of passing that morally reprehensible and just irresponsible tax cut that gave the president a victory early on. You're going to see a lot of people who are hurting continue to hurt. You're going to see a lot of people turning apathetic because their economic conditions aren't getting better. When their paychecks get cut, when they don't have access to health care, and you've got employers out there wanting everybody to work for $10 an hour without any health care insurance, and don't even get me started on setting a little bit aside for retirement. Nobody wants to do that anymore. It's becoming more and more evident that organized labor is becoming more important today than it ever has, because you see just this culture of greed, and you see a culture of corruption, and you see people's paychecks getting smaller and having to take 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet. And I can't believe that we're still talking about making the minimum wage $15 an hour when that should be common sense to everybody. And, I've gone at it with the State Chamber of Commerce on this as well, in a very civil fashion, I might add. But, surrounding states to Pennsylvania that have raised minimum wage standards have not suffered. Their economies have not suffered, yet we're still using that argument that $15 an hour is going to bankrupt small businesses.
So we're looking at tax policy, right? Potentially repealing on the House side, at least, the tax cuts.
That's right.
The minimum wage. We're very involved, as you know, Abe, with and we've collaborated quite a bit with Senator Casey around elevating the issue of raising the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit and expanding that to childless workers. If you're working and you just happen to be under 26 years old, why shouldn't you get that credit? That would certainly impact. And those are the kind of policies, when you sort of dig into the numbers, that disproportionately would benefit Latina workers. And just think about, that working person. It's, we know so many of them, right? That 22, 23, 24-year-old Latina, she's waiting to have a family because she's going to school at night. She's working full time. She's maybe a caregiver. And, why doesn't she get the opportunity to get that earned income tax credit and get some relief for student loans and raise the minimum wage? Because even if she's not making a minimum wage, that would raise her wages just being above that level. So we really have to push some of these very very tangible policies. And I would suggest that the Democratic leadership in the House has to be bold. They have to be bold. Right. And let's be real. The Speaker of the House, Pelosi, at times she's been a little timid with her rhetoric around health care issues as it relates to, and we're digging into the numbers, because even some of these options like Medicare for all, which sounds great, and we're certainly looking into that, sometimes these policies don't impact the way they should all the demographics. So if you focus the healthcare solution on Medicare tends to benefit older people, obviously, and a wider demographic. Whereas if you focus it more on the Medicaid side or on the exchange side, that would tend to support more younger people and obviously a more diverse set of people that need to help. So we want to help everybody, but we have to understand. And look, Abe, we've had these conversations on the real that sometimes the infrastructure conversation. We talk about infrastructure, and we're down with infrastructure. And I had a conversation with some very senior people in the building trades in Washington, D.C. that but we'll have that. We'll talk about that offline. But the bottom line is, I said, look, we're down with infrastructure. We want, from a Latino advocate perspective, we're down with supporting people's job growth, but it has to be job growth that reflects the diversity of the labor pool. So infrastructure just can't be for older white guys that work in construction in the Midwest. That it has to cross a group of fields. And when we think about women in the labor force, very heavily engaged in education and in healthcare jobs.
Right.
So there has to be support for them as well. And you listen to Abe Amoros, Democratic strategist here on WPPM People Powered Radio. And when we come back from break, Abe, I want to ask you about the labor movement. Before we get back to Abe, breaking news. The evening we are taping this segment of Ray's Talk Show, outgoing Speaker Paul Ryan gives in to President Trump. What a sad sack of leadership this guy is, and explicitly passes a spending bill that would add $5 billion for border wall funding, knowing it has no chance in the Senate when the bill goes to the Senate floor, the Senate tomorrow morning. Looks like we'll have a government shutdown because of what exactly? On the same day he announced the withdrawal of troops out of Syria, while recently sending soldiers to our southern border to protect us from families like Jackelin Caal who are reporting to ports of entry to legally apply for asylum. This man has no interest in our safety, and that's clear from his decision related to Syria, and potentially they're reporting to have withdrawing troops from Afghanistan as of this evening. Think about it. This president is so incompetent, so treasonous in his behavior, his decisions so against the interest of our country, that Secretary of Defense James Mad Dog Mattis and outgoing Chief of Staff John Kelly, who in the case of Kelly is really digging the administration's racist agenda himself, are resigning. They can't take it anymore. The country is under attack from within because an agent of the Russian government is our president. Yeah, I said it. And it's going to be even more crystal clear as the Mueller investigation provides more information. Resist accordingly. Let's get back to Abe Amoros on what's next for Democrats. What's next for labor? The percentage of people in formal trade union, labor unions has gone down steadily over the last, really our whole lifetimes, Abe. The Janus Supreme Court decision last year even was a bigger blow to labor. We even saw that in some of the political donations that didn't happen in the fall that we would have maybe expected. How do we reverse this? The labor movement at times has been resistance to the demographic trends of this country, with more women and people of color in the labor force, and many of them have not. Some have, but many of them have not sort of caught up with the times. So where does the formal labor movement, Abe, fit into this conversation going into 2019?
Okay, this is an excellent question, and I want to share some really topical items with you on this. First of all, yes, there's no doubt that the Janus case crippled our efforts in many ways. But
very briefly, can you explain what the Janus case was? What that Supreme Court decision did?
Yes. So Janus was a plaintiff in a case that went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and I'm going to boil it down. It basically said, in order to get union benefits, you don't have to belong to a union. That's basically it. It's completely unfair. It was a politicized decision. You had all kinds of pro-business groups that were funding the Janus case all the way to the Supreme Court. Of course, the Supreme Court, having had two appointments, actually at the time it was just one appointment by a newly elected Republican president, that really tipped the balance. So it was a 5-4 decision by the United States Supreme Court that basically said you can get what the union bargains for. You can get all the goodies without paying into it. That's getting something for nothing. It's like me walking into the supermarket and walking out with a bag of potatoes and saying, see ya, I'm going to enjoy these Popeyes, but you know what? I don't have to pay for them, which is absolutely ridiculous. Now, in light of that, we knew this decision was going to go down unfavorably. Unions started organizing and connecting with their members and reminding them that what they have is because of collective bargaining and the strength that they individually bring to the table by staying members of a union, staying as members of a union, paying those dues on a regular basis, and becoming active in policy and in politics as well. So as a result of those preemptive efforts, in some unions, I was reading some numbers 2 days ago. AFSCME has gone up slightly in Pennsylvania. SEIU has gone up slightly in Pennsylvania. So the effects of the case, I'm not saying that we're not going to feel any pain, but it's not as bad as people are saying it is. There was an old saying that the reports of my death are greatly exaggerated. Well, you know what? The reports of labor being crippled, I believe, are greatly exaggerated because we have gone out of our way to remind members, ask them why they joined a union in the first place. And it's really gotten to their core, and very few people. I mean, I was looking at statistics from the New York State Teachers Association, Ralph, and out of 400,000 members, only 200 of them have decided to opt out because it's their right now, because of this crazy law. It's their right to opt out and get something for nothing. So I believe that the labor movement really had to look at itself in the eye and make sure that it did everything possible to keep members interested in staying in the union because it benefits them personally as well as their families.
But beyond that, Abe, even before the Janus decision, this has been a crisis for the formal labor movement. With so how does it begin? And I think there's an organizing strategy and also a messaging strategy, because one of the things I think that has hurt the formal labor movement is that, and I think it's hurt the larger Democratic Party, is I think the message has been very rhetorical. It's sort of this kind of, it's very much the same message from the 70s. We're about working people and working families and an honest day's work for an honest day's pay. But it's a lot more complicated than that, especially with the rapidly changing economy that we have. So how does the labor movement get out of this rut that it's in terms of attracting members and sort of being a more influential in Democratic politics?
Let me answer that with one word: millennials. Let me explain what I mean. I am one of the vice presidents for the Pennsylvania AFL-CIO. We had an executive committee meeting yesterday where we discussed a recent survey that was held with workers aged 22 to 65. The millennials were the ones that showed a greater interest in promoting, advocating the organized labor message of fair wages, decent health care, and a suitable pension plan for when they retire. More than anybody else, it's a golden opportunity for us to really work with progressive groups who care about income inequality, who care about fairness, who care about the protections that are afforded under collective bargaining agreements, and really coalesce. There's no reason why we cannot have more younger people coming to union meetings and really organizing where they work. I'll give you another example. We had a very successful drive of Latino workers at a warehouse in Kutztown, Pennsylvania, where the Advanced Auto Parts would not give workers basic safety. They wouldn't even give them gloves, Ralph. They wouldn't even put ice in the break room. They made sure that the working conditions were not as safe as possible. In comes the Laborers International Union, organizes, talks to people, and before you know it, they're getting gloves. They're getting ice in the water coolers now. They even got Labor Day off as a paid holiday, which was unheard of in that 5,000 worker facility. And as a result, they became organized. The first vote didn't go the way we wanted to. We lost by 40 votes. The second vote, we won by 50 votes. So once you get to people who have been impacted and who believe in the message of equality, like millennials, like people of color, bro, I got to tell you, I was brought to tears listening to some of those Latinos that came from the Dominican Republic, that came from Mexico, that came from Puerto Rico, and all they wanted was a little bit of respect, and they felt that the union was their best way to get respect as a worker, because there's dignity in all work.
And that's the key, which, look, I mean, and I'm not just saying this, but La Una has a reputation in our community and amongst these leadership circles and amongst progressive circles is being open to this diversity, taking
Absolutely.
the effort to organize at those kind of work sites. And it has a very interesting sort of immigrant working person tradition that people should look into. But my point is that, and we have, you have leadership, including you, of course, that's very diverse and from the community around the country, but not all labor unions are like that. And let's keep that real. So I think one of the things that,
you're right about
particularly
that.
particularly in the building trades, if we're going to be honest, and some of the specialty labor unions, that they've been resistant to, embracing a more diverse young workforce within their ranks. And, that gets into the same mentality that has labor members in the Midwest and throughout the country voting for Republicans. And that didn't start just with Trump, as we know. And that buys into this, anxiety around and fear around immigrants. And as I told people the other day, I said, look, the reality is kind of part of this debate about border security is that the reality is that, we have essentially, a net negative immigration flow on the southern border. And, these folks aren't really upset about that. They don't even understand the issue. The issue is they're concerned about the increasing diversity of our country. And that's a bigger conversation. And you're listening to Abe Amoros here on WPPM 106.5 People-Powered Media. And when we come back, Abe, one of my favorite topics. Well, actually, before we come back to break, the one thing I did want to mention is that when it comes to you hit on something very important, Abe, where workers are at. Because what I've been thinking a lot about is that labor has to make more of an effort to organize in the fast food sector, in the gig economy, in the tech sector, which we're going to find a lot of people increasingly tying into. And so that's a conversation as we talk to other labor leaders. We're going to talk about. When we come back, Abe, we can't talk about what's next to the Democratic Party without talking about the 2020 field. It's already begun, brother. When we come back, we're talking to Abe Amoros here on. Welcome back. You're listening to Ray Collazo on What's Next special series, WPPM 106.5 People-Powered Media. And I'm so lucky. The reason I started podcasting and now on WPPM, a community-powered media here, and part of the Philly Can family, is that, I felt selfish because I had all these amazing conversations with my friends as we would drive to work or drive home from work or at meetings on strategy or shooting the breeze on the weekend with all these amazing friends of mine around the country. I had to tape these conversations so people can hear all these amazing people. And we're talking to one of my great friends on the line, Abe Amoros, who's the state political director for Labor's International, legislative director, and a great Democratic strategist and friend. Abe, we couldn't finish this conversation with a little shop talk about the 2020 field. So what I've tried to do, because we could sit here and we could probably have and maybe we should have just a podcast for the next 2 years about this conversation, because we could talk about it all day. And there's so many characters, there are literally dozens of people that could be in the mix. It was sad to hear that part of the reason that Deval Patrick, the former governor of Massachusetts, is not running because his wife is ill. So what I'm going to do, Abe, is I put them in some general categories, and I'm just going to ask you some questions related to that. So the first two people, they're sort of a category within themselves, are really the Obama legacy folks, one of which we assume is going to run. The other one we don't. The first one is we're going to talk about Joe Biden for a second. So Joe Biden, former vice president of the United States, sort of the embodiment, and what he has an advantage of is three things. One is obviously name recognition. Everybody knows who Joe Biden is. The second is that he sort of embodies sort of a legacy from the Obama years and good feelings and good times and fun. And he also embodies sort of what many believe was forgotten about, not only in 2016, but by the Democratic Party for many years and possibly a few decades, sort of the sort of stereotypical working white American. And so but also someone that has good feelings with the Obama coalition. So Abe, when you think about Joe Biden and his place in this potential field, what are your thoughts?
I think that he's going to run. I do believe that he has been asked to run by regular people, by elected officials, by appointed officials, by major donors. He's got it all. I'm going to share a little story with you.
Make it quick, Abe, because I want to talk to you about all these people. But just so because I only have so much time with you, brother. We got a lot to talk about.
Well, let me tell you this. Earlier this year, I was working on the Connor Lamb race, a special election before he became a congressman. Joe Biden came in, rallied 500 people without having to utter Trump's name. Afterward, he took pictures with everybody in the rope line, and I mean everybody. He stopped to talk to people. He took photographs. He even took a couple minutes to talk to some folks on the phone as a result of that. He is lovable. He understands government better than anybody else that's going to be running in the field. And I'm telling you right now, his message on economics and equality is perfect.
You know, it's interesting with Joe because, first of all, when he grew up in Philadelphia, he essentially was like, and you know this, Abe, being a Pennsylvanian, he felt as much of a senator from Pennsylvania than Delaware,
right?
Because of
that's right.
He basically was a senator in the Philly media market. His roots were in Scranton, PA, so he's
right.
got a lot of appeal in this part of the country for sure. And I think about, and again, we're saying this not endorsing anybody here on the show right now, so
right.
We're just talking about it. Is that it's interesting to hear sort of when people talk about the downside for his candidacy, right? Well, he's maybe too old, which kind of. Doesn't seem like that's as big a deal anymore, considering we got a curmudgeon in the White House now and Bernie Sanders, who we're going to talk about, and others' viability, seemingly. And, he does sort of have that appeal to a wide range of, sort of a demographic that's been harder for us to crack. I guess the bottom line is, will he be able to connect with this new generation, which is more progressive than Democratic? And, is sort of like his grandkids' generation. So I guess that's going to be the question for Joe. There was and I don't have the source for it, but I'll tweet it out. I saw some polling the other day amongst Latino voters, Abe, and the person by far that came out the highest favorability to run for president is someone that, by all accounts, is not going to run for president. But I did want to note her quickly, Michelle Obama, Abe. By far.
Oh, absolutely. No question.
So what are your thoughts quickly about Michelle potentially running, even though it's probably a long shot?
Yeah, she won't run. She's already she's already been throughout the country saying she's not.
So maybe the better question is, Abe, what does that mean to you in terms of the qualities people are looking for in the next president?
Yes, it means that people are gravitating towards things like decency, honored public service, intellect. Just generally being nice. I mean, I can't put
competence,
a point on
class,
competence,
women leadership.
Yes. Not just a female, but a woman of color.
Absolutely.
I mean, and to me, that represents a lot of strength.
Positive,
Yes.
I mean, I think also, and I think that's one of the reasons that sometimes people with Joe Biden. That I think people, they like to have some fun. They like to smile when they think about their politics, and I think that Barack Obama certainly was part of that. And Michelle, it's hard not to smile when you just think about the woman. I mean, she's not only all of those things, but she's personable, she's fun, she's a great dancer. She'll go on Ellen DeGeneres and let her hair down and just be a real person and someone you can crack a joke with. So the next group of people, Abe, is the I call them the hippies, the old school progressives that are having their time here in the spotlight. Of course, the captain of this team is Bernie Sanders, but I would put Elizabeth Warren in that mix. I'd put Sherrod Brown, who I think increasingly is someone that should seriously think about running. The more I think about it, so I guess my question to you, Abe, is, what should be their focus as individual candidates? Kind of, they have a lane. They're going to have a crowded lane, but some would say, their policies are on the money, but maybe aren't the right people to connect with the broad demographic of the Democratic Party.
Right. I mean, Bernie's had his moment in the sun. There's no question about it. He has a significant following. I'm not disputing that he's a viable candidate because he is. I think Senator Elizabeth Warren has really shot herself in the foot with this DNA testing and the whole Native American thing. I don't think that's I think people are going to quickly push her off to the side. In terms of Senator Sherrod Brown from Ohio, I do believe that he has a significant platform. I think he's going to be taken very seriously. I think he's got a good temperament, comes across as a common guy, somebody who's approachable, somebody who's decent, somebody you can talk to, you can have a beer with, a chat with.
Ohio. I mean, you got to look at that.
Yeah,
I mean, he's the only Democrat that could probably beat Trump in Ohio in 2018 and 2020.
No question about it. That's absolutely right. So,
we got to keep
of
that
those
real.
Of those three, I think Sherrod would have the upper hand.
Interesting. Let's go to the coastal nerds. Kamala Harris and Cory Booker, both brilliant. Both progressive, even though Cory sometimes, I mean, we know, with the corporate stuff. Both personable, particularly Cory Booker, fantastic with social media and connecting with young people on their platforms.
Yep.
But both have a lot to prove as it relates to, running in an election like this with this crowded field. And are they sort of I guess my question is, they're certainly viable candidates, strong candidates. They will be fine presidents at the end of the day. But is their profile the right fit right now?
No, I don't believe it is that, but I do believe that their profile would be perfect for vice president. Either one. And in fact, in my mind, I think a Biden-Harris ticket would be absolutely phenomenal. Just my personal opinion. It's not the union's position. I haven't had any discussions with anybody internally. It's just Abe Amoros' personal opinion. But I think that Harris brings a lot of things to the table. She was a phenomenal attorney general in the state of California. She brings a tremendous amount of experience there. I think she's been an effective senator. I think she's been very vocal on issues that truly matter. She has really stood aside.
She goes continually further left in the Senate. It's interesting.
Well,
it's interesting.
Yeah, but you know what? That is going to be important for the progressive groups. No doubt about it. You've got to have somebody who is going to be able to relate to those groups because they bring a ton of votes to the table. And again, this is all about compromise. Everybody has to understand that at the end of the day, political science is nothing more than compromise. You're not going to get 100% of that pie. Are you going to be happy with 80%, 75%, or even 60%?
And the thing people have to keep an eye on is the calendar. One of the things that I've been studying, Abe, and looking at, and the people may not realize this, is that California has not by chance moved up their primary to March 2nd, and they have a very robust early vote calendar there. So literally days after Iowa, people in California will be voting, and that puts not only sort of a more diverse, which is a good thing, a more diverse voting pool into the mix for sort of early influence in the process, but also puts her much more in play. Even though she may not be the only California candidate. Quickly, Abe, the billionaires, Steyer, Bloomberg. Just a quick thought about, do you think they would have any play? Steyer, him being the lead on the impeachment thing, I think looks better and better for him every day.
Well, I wish he'd back off a little bit because I think what we need to do is let the Mueller investigation take its full course before we start really hammering on the impeachment issue. And again, Ralph, I'm saying this for snarky, political, strategic reasons. I want that SOB, Donald J. Trump, as weak as possible if he makes it to 2020.
I also really don't know if we want a rich guy. I don't know. Do we want a rich guy? Even a well-intentioned rich guy. I don't know. And I love Steyer.
I'll tell you something. I learned a long time ago, Ralph, that knocking somebody for being rich is just as silly as knocking somebody for being poor. I think that we got to look at at what they bring to the table in terms of ideas, in terms of fairness, in terms of equality. I know a lot of rich guys that care about the little guy, like Governor Tom Wolf.
No question about it, Abe. I remember, we're going to talk about this 17 times on this show before that.
That's good.
But remember when I said this to you? Being the lead on the impeachment talk is going to be a benefit to that man. I'm telling you, we'll talk about it. New stars, the people that even though many of them lost in their state elections in 2018, this team is the Andrew Gillums, the Stacey Abrams, the Beto O'Rourke's, who's probably the captain of his ship. A lot of energy behind those people, my friend.
A lot of energy behind those people. They would make excellent cabinet-level choices.
Oh, my God.
They would.
You're tough. You're tough. You really value experience, Abe. I know. I'm kind of reading between the lines. Yeah. You like someone that has and I said it on last week's show. And I went to college. I went to college with the guy. Actually, went to college with two people on that list because L.A. Mayor Eric Garcetti, who'd be sort of unfortunately, the audio cut out. So you're not hearing the rest of my conversation with Abe Amoros, where we got into a little bit into some of the younger candidates, some of the long shots, potentially some of the celebrities that may get into the race. But needless to say, it's clear Abe is big on experience and a strong political leadership resume. Nothing wrong with that. I certainly sympathize with him, craving a steady hand of experience in this volatile time. But ultimately, it really remains to be seen what voters, Democratic voters, and America's going to be looking for in a year and a half. Experience, ideas, authenticity, inspiration, or political sex appeal. Vamos a ver. Thanks for joining Ray's Talk Show. I want to wish you a blessed Christmas and holiday season. As my abuela used to say, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year's. We hope you get to spend time with family, get some worship and praise on, dwell in gratefulness, grab some pernil and coquito, and most importantly, relax. Suave. Peace, y'all. Have a wonderful day and enjoy your holiday season.